It's like the old days.
Yeah. Can I go back and sit over there?
Right. I believe the meeting is now being recorded for the benefit of those who haven't turned up this evening. First item on the agenda for tonight's meeting is to receive and accept apologies for absence, except that there are none, which is very gratifying. Item 2 on the agenda is representations from interested parties, of which I have had no notice of any, and as there is nobody here, I assume there is none. Which takes us rapidly on to declarations of interest. To receive any declarations of interest from members and officers under Section 50 of the Local Government Act 2000, under Standing Orders 35 and 36. Firstly, any disclosable pecuniary interests. I would remind members that we will be discussing the neighbourhood plan. Therefore, if anybody has a property that they own, which actually is directly affected by one of the proposed development sites, that is probably a disclosable pecuniary interest.
Does that mean abutting, or does it just mean near to, or what?
I think in your case, Councillor Oakes, I think I can safely say it wouldn't matter whether it was abutting or near to, because there isn't one.
Yes, thank you. I'm grateful for that.
And you ever say so?
If there are no disclosable pecuniary interests, then
No.
other interests, and it seems to me that anybody who owns a property anywhere in Oundle probably has an other interest which they should at least declare. So anybody who is a homeowner in Oundle,
Yes.
which is everybody except me, but I will declare another interest on the basis that I'm also a member of the Blackthorn Neighbourhood Plan group. Which brings us, as soon as Annika has managed to keep up, to the minutes of the previous meetings being plural, because we had a meeting on the 4th of April and we had another one 2 days later.
I propose them.
Well, we should probably take them in order. So the 4th of April first, proposed by Councillor Oakes N.
Yes.
I wasn't there.
Present.
Abstaining from that.
The only person who can, in fact, second them is me, so I'll second them. And only us can vote, and as we both proposed and seconded it, I think it's now carried unanimously by those who were present.
Thank you.
I should probably
I'll do the same for the next one.
sign. So you sign this.
Oh, thanks,
Two,
and you
5, 17.
I was in Newcastle.
That's those ones. Then the meeting which took place on the 6th, which was attended by myself, Councillor Neville Oakes, Councillor Sewell, Councillor Chesser, Glenn and Sparks.
I propose them.
I'll second that.
That's a good idea. All those in favour who were present?
Thank you.
Everybody. Right. That takes us on, I think, hopefully, to the planning applications, of which there are mercifully few, given how long we're probably going to spend on the next item.
I hope not.
The first is 14 St Peter's Road.
Right, pretty straightforward. 2-storey side rear extensions. Now, St Peter's Road is composed of a number of buildings, and a certain councillor to my left will know a lot about this, as he used to live there. But they are an eclectic set of buildings, lots of different design, and this particular one is there, sort of smack bang in the middle, and there it is on the satellite. But that's the recent photo, which was actually taken by my lady wife. Well, she needs a bit of training.
He's training me, Mum.
She needs a bit of training.
Oh, I know, that's the football coach, isn't it? It's Mr.
I would like you to
Yes,
observe the
footy.
different angles that are actually.
Right,
We were just there today.
that is, and you got to say, it's not terribly attractive. What do you say about it? As it is. Now, what they're proposing to do is to put that on it. Now basically, if I go back to the picture, I'll go back to it, they're going to build over the left garage, effectively, in order to, what,
How high with the roof that's there?
oh, I don't know, when you say how high,
Well, will it
well,
match the
well,
roof
yeah,
scale?
it'll be the same height as that big bit there.
Will it?
Yep.
Well, it says two-storey.
Yeah, you'll see.
extension,
No,
so
look,
it must
this is a significant. This is a significant addition.
All right, okay.
Right, this is a significant addition. This virtually increases the size of this house by, I don't know, 25%, 30%.
That's quite good.
So it's big. But the point I'd make is that it's in an area which is full of eclectic buildings. So we're not talking, you know, whatever else. So, but they're looking to put that in, okay, on the floor area side of things. Here's the first floor, so you're going to get all that. So they're putting something pretty substantial on the back and on the side.
Doubling the footprint.
Pretty well. I worked it out at around about 30%. It's probably, it could be more than that. It's significant. Anyway, let's put it like this. It's significant, and I'll use that word. Okay.
Wait, I was saying, when I took the picture today, the two houses opposite, which David will know about, are quite big,
They certainly are.
and it does look quite small opposite.
That house on St Peter's Road, because I live very close to there, is actually just one of the smallest houses on St Peter's Road. And in fact, the house opposite you're referring to has actually just had an extension added to
and
it.
it's quite big.
So there's no precedent has already been set in St Peter's, and I can see absolutely no reason why they should go ahead.
I think
Can I just say, I think this is a massive improvement on what is there at the moment.
It looks nice.
I mean, I think I think this fits in with the vernacular of the road.
It's nice, isn't it?
The thing that's there at the moment is,
Non-
well, you know, just you just don't know what to say about it, frankly. I think this is a massive improvement. They clearly they're going for it, tidying it up enormously.
Yeah, and I think,
The only downside-
sorry, Neville, the important thing about these planning applications is I feel we need to steer clear of opinion, which is whether you consider it good or bad or indifferent, which is your own personal. I think we have to sort of stick to
What's in the
what's a fact and what's not fact, and in fact, I agree with you that is an vast improvement on there, but you can't have opinion when you're debating.
Oh no, I have
Well,
to
you
say,
could if it was a
I'm
nice-
terribly sorry to disagree with you entirely. Yes, you can. That's the whole point about actually discussing these things. You have an opinion as to whether or not it fits or it
your
doesn't
judgment
fit.
shouldn't be guided by solely whether it looks nice or not nice. That's completely.
I agree with you. I agree with you entirely, but I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying that at all.
Are there any
Councillor.
objections for any of the neighbours?
No.
I would think most of the neighbours might find it quite difficult to object, since most of them have already extended
They've already
their
done
houses
it.
in a similar fashion,
Exactly.
as I did myself a number of years
Exactly.
ago when I lived up practically
Can I
opposite.
just say, David, I mean, exactly. Look, when I said these things, you know, I think it's going to be an improvement. It's going to be an improvement.
Right, I
Because-
think we've got the message.
Because all we got to do
I
is,
hear no objections, so I'm going to simply say, let's move on.
all you got to do is look at that. All you got to do is look at that.
Right,
And you go, right, okay.
can we go on to 28 Hill Highfield?
What's the architecturally brilliant about that?
Hillfield.
Nothing. Right, sorry. I'll blat on. Okay, Hillfield Road. Now this is another fairly straightforward job. Now this is on the corner of a road that's not a million miles away from us. And what they want to do, and this is, my lady wife took this photograph. I'm trying to teach her. And you can see that's the back of the house. And what they want to do is just extend the back. Now, fundamentally, what they want to do is stick a single-storey extension down the back. don't know what else to say.
Only things.
Modern estate, reducing the size of the garden. I've no evidence of any complaints from any of the neighbours. Having checked it at 4 o'clock this afternoon, very difficult to say anything more about it. I mean, honestly, it's well, what do you say?
I dare say that if this had been a double-storey extension,
I was going to think that, but I couldn't.
the issue might have been somewhat different, simply because we'd have been back in the territory which we've explored a number of times, which is that when this estate was developed, certain properties were kind of designated as being certain sizes, and you can simply extend them beyond the original limits and start destroying the balance of the estate. But on the basis that this is a single-storey rear extension, I think it becomes more difficult to maintain that even as an argument, let alone the fact that it's never succeeded once when we've raised it. So I can't see an objection, and unless anybody else can, I suggest we...
No, and there are no logged objections, and I always use my thing. I say at the time I checked the website, I can do no more than that.
Can we look at the next one?
Yes,
This is quite
I'm
interesting.
moving on. Garage is adjacent. Right, now look, we had no objection to this. This is a set of garages which is just beyond the George on the left-hand side.
Oh, right.
We had no objection, and there's no material change. Full stop. That's all I'm going to put up.
Well, unless anybody has studied the variations of conditions that are being proposed and suddenly gets excited about it in a way we weren't before,
They are minor.
do we want to make no objection? Do we just make
I'm not putting any other slide up, because I just think, this is a shrug shoulders job.
No objection?
We had no objection to the original proposal.
Is there an element of predetermination if you say you're not putting up whatever's new to be looked at? Predetermination.
I don't understand that, Mayor. I don't understand that at all. No. All I'm putting up now is a factual thing. There's no objection. We didn't object in 2011 to the actual development. I've looked at the changes, and there's no real, what you might call, material change. In other words, they're not suddenly going to stick a block of flats up there, or anything like that. They're minor changes, really. And I can't see we can go anywhere near this. It's a variation application. And basically what they've done is they've just changed a bit of the design, is what they've done.
I think the issue might have been if we had insisted on conditions being applied in the first place, and they were now trying to vary those conditions in a way we weren't happy with. Yes, I could see you might want to make a comment, but I'm not entirely convinced that, bearing in mind we had no objection in the first place, that this is likely to...
Can I just say, I could go into detail, but I'm trying to keep this short and sweet.
We've got a picture, Neville.
No.
Nothing.
I could have chucked a ton of stuff up there on this, because we looked at it in some detail years ago. Fundamentally, you've got these garages which are just beyond the George pub. You go up there and they're on the right. They're more or less derelict, and there's just a proposal to demolish them and build a building there. We had no objection to it way back in 2011. And incidentally, I had to dig around to get that piece of info. But I actually maybe I apologise to the planning committee. Maybe I should have put up the whole 9 yards and said, look, this is what they were going to do, and this is what they're going to do now. There's no real change at all. It's minuscule.
Let's move on. 5 Cotterstop Road.
Right. Okay. Now this is the most interesting one. Now, that's 5 Cotterstop Road. It's actually on the junction between Cotterstop Road and Lime Avenue. And my dear lady, councillor wife, will tell you a little bit about this. But basically, they want to build, and that's a satellite, you can see the property, and they want to build a building there, a bungalow. Now, maybe my wife would like to actually talk you through this.
Okay, so, as it is at the moment, this area, probably about that big, is where she parks the cars. Yeah? But here, I guess it's this property, they are extending upwards. And I don't know if we know whether they've got planning permission for that, or whether it's
Not
a
had
long
that.
time ago.
But
Not
they've already put scaffolding up.
That's right, but
Yeah.
I didn't know, and I've not been on planning, but Neville didn't know.
I have no knowledge of this.
Planning permission, but they're extending up double storey. So here, she has a fence, and with this, it's going to really overlook into her garden. So what I didn't go into detail in conversation, by the way, but she told me that she wanted to use part of the garden beyond the fence, so that would be moved, to build this bungalow. And this is where she's going to have a garage. So she'll have, because of this being built, she feels she'll have more privacy.
So she's basically building a house in between her house
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
Yeah,
neighbours.
no, that's right. This is the area
Right, so
that,
that's the parking I'm talking about. Right, so the bungalow is going this,
Right, right,
a bit to that side, but it's going there. She owns all this land.
It's a bungalow, is it?
yeah, that's
I
right.
haven't seen the actual picture of the bungalow, so I've only just seen it today when I came
Yeah,
back,
mate,
but
well,
that's what she told me.
Well, I can go through that,
Okay,
but, I mean, we're looking at an infill plot.
but this is a
Basically.
little bit higher, so it is going to overlook.
Now, can I just say, I'm not aware of a planning application from 1A.
That's what we do.
Do you remember, David?
I don't. I think what we therefore ought to do, and I know it's a slight aside, but I think we ought to contact ENC Planning and just say that in considering this application, it's come to light that, and it may be that it is one where we have simply failed to recall that it's come forward, but in case they haven't applied and should have done, could they please just check it out?
I think that's very,
I
very...
couldn't remember having
No.
seen any plans for 1A.
She actually, her words were, and they've been given planning permission to build, to do this
Can I just say, look, all I can say, honestly, is that I follow these things assiduously, and I might have missed it, because I'm not perfect. I'm not aware that 1A has applied for any extension of planning permission.
But can I be right, the scaffolding
But
is
I will-
quite high there,
Yeah, yeah.
and I can see how it's going to
Yeah.
really
Well,
overlook it
The,
into, you know, her
but the
garden.
big question is, what do we say about this proposal? That's the big thing, isn't
Oh,
it,
you mean this
really?
one?
This one here.
Yeah, regardless of what 1A is going to do,
NP. No, NO.
regardless of what 1A is going to do with their extension, it's an infill plot,
So it's not.
it's a bungalow. Let me just go through a few more slides.
There we go.
This is what it's designed to be. So we're not looking at an enormous thing here. As I say, it's...
2 floors.
No, it's 2 floors, sorry, I do apologise. No, it's right, it's 2
To work
floors.
how that
Well,
fits.
it will
Chalet,
be, it
yeah.
will be, because she's trying to block out the other house.
She's trying to block out the other house.
Bungalow wouldn't have
But
the
it's-
effect she's wanting.
It's a bit sort of her argument of so she won't be overlooked by the other one, she's going to be overlooked by that one instead.
Yeah.
Well-
Can I just say, all I'm
Yeah, but
saying...
she'll control it, won't she? Because she'll own
No
it.
windows in that
No
area.
windows
Yeah,
on that
that's
side.
right.
Yeah. You know the plot on the corner, just as a slight aside, the plot on the corner of Rockingham Hills, the little bungalow that was there, that have now, she sold whoever that is, built a house on one half of the garden, and is now building another house right next to it on the other half of the garden. So one plot is now 3 houses. If those sorts of things are allowed to go through, which
Left no
presumably it
land,
has to,
left no grass.
we can't really do anything about these sorts of things, can we? We're hamstrung.
Can I just say, in all honesty here, we'd have a hell of a hard job, even if we objected to this, stopping E&C from saying yes.
Absolutely. That's my frustration with it all, that we seem to be, you know, we say stuff and then...
We do get listened to occasionally.
That bungalow is that is directly opposite June Round's house, and they've had all their high fence hedging
The hedging
taken
removed.
down. So the only thing I would wonder is if there's any objection.
And of course, you'll know that June Round is a former...
It's quite wide there, isn't it, the top end?
June Round is a former mayor,
Right.
and she lives directly opposite this property. Okay.
Seems to me that on planning grounds there are only probably two issues. One is the displacement of the parking, because it clearly isn't going to be where it was,
No.
but there's enough room on site to accommodate it.
There is.
But it will have to be accessed from closer to the junction than it currently is, because however you do it, it's going to move it slightly closer to the
Yeah,
junction.
let's have a look at that. I'll go back to the that. There's room enough for there
But
for off-street parking.
I don't think that's a problem looking at it. The other thing would be this. What would actually ultimately concern me is if another property was built between the new one and 1A in the fullness of time. What that may do is somewhat disturb the sort of the street scene by resulting in one side looking far more potentially crammed than the other. It's not an issue at the moment with just adding in that one, but I could see that we might want to look at it if another one came forward.
I understand what you're saying, Chairman, but I don't think we can second guess that.
No, we can't. It's an observation rather than an issue about this planning application, which I have to say I can't see how we object to it realistically. Why would we want to?
No, and that observation, Chairman, is exactly the same, because it seems to be sort of endemic now in Oundle, especially up around that area, with the original sites all had large gardens, and now everyone is chopping those gardens into half and selling off half and building a house in it. It seems to be, you know, something that Oundle just lives with, because that's what we're doing. You know,
I go a little bit further than that. It actually, from my studies, is that that's a national trend. People are less interested in growing roses and more interested in having patios
And plastic grass.
and other stuff.
and
That-
taking the money from
And
selling
also
off the plot.
£100,000 for the sale of the
Absolutely.
plot.
Absolutely.
This is only outline planning, isn't it?
No, full.
So,
It's a full.
so
No, it's
do
a
we
full
know
planning
what
app.
what this other house is going to look like in more detail then?
Which other house?
The chalet.
new one.
Have you got some?
Yeah, that's what it,
Yeah.
No, well, that's it. I mean, you've got your block plan,
and the
and you've got
views.
that, and you've got that. That's it.
That's what it
So what we don't have is any exterior.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
No,
Elevations.
you have,
Other than that.
we've got you. I know, I've got the elevations there.
Yeah.
But basically, look, you know, it's what it looks like. But basically, it's an infill plot. And
Is it sort of clad in wood? Is that what the
No.
plan is? Is it just
no, they're going to use materials that match the existing.
Right.
But the only thing
That's
I
right.
was just thinking was, she has customers, doesn't she? I know only perhaps one or two people come at a time.
Sanet Robinson, by the way, is
It's Robinson. There is no access on Cotterstock Road, because I walk round into
There
that house. So so her entrance to the property for herself and all her clients is
Just
that
Lime
bit where
Road.
you come round the corner.
Right.
I just came round the corner and just parked on the left. And if there's going to be that new bungalow, chalet, I wonder whether parking
I
is
don't know what
there.
the business is. What's
She's a physiotherapist.
Sports physio.
No, that's what I'm just
I mean, it's
thinking.
like normal visitors going for a weekend.
Look, it's Lime Avenue, for goodness sake. I mean, if you parked anywhere down there, it wouldn't really matter. It's no big deal.
It is quiet down
Isn't
there.
that
Yeah,
where we
it's
can
very,
find
very-
the lines, isn't it?
It's very, very quiet down there.
No, it's further up near
Is
the
it
school.
further up?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one of the chairman. I think it's another observation for you, because you are keen on that as well as I am, and that we have to take, as a council, we have to look at that area for the parking, because it's coming up all the time, especially at school turnout time. And that if you go up Potterstock Road,
I-
which I did today at 3:30 or whatever, it's like gridlock. It's insane. People are actually driving on pavements past each other. It's a nightmare.
Tends to be Ballinaby Road though,
It's a
not
nightmare.
Lyme. Yeah, well my son was just finished there, so yeah, it is.
So but what, okay, two questions. First of all, does that affect this application?
No, absolutely not. That was just an observation.
No. Can I just say,
about the car parking.
no, and may I say so, an entirely apposite one, because parking up there has become an issue where it never was before,
Absolutely.
because of the shifting of the school. I really can't see that this is really.
Chairman, we worry about density. We haven't used the word density here at all. And it
God.
probably is a factor if you look at things like the amount of available parking, because there's also this idea about 1.5 spaces per car.
Lyme Avenue is fairly quiet though.
How do you think the density
I think this is
is here?
it's a blot on the landscape here.
Hang on, I've just asked David a
I-
question.
Yes, I know, but I know the answer.
I mean, I don't particularly see it as an issue. I doubt that there will be a problem from this. It's the application that may follow
It's
that
the-
perhaps might
It's the thin end of the
perhaps,
wedge situation.
create more of an issue. And I take on board Councillor Humphrey's point about parking in that area and the possibilities of displacement now that it's been made more difficult to park in Bellamy Road, whether people will actually simply come back a bit further and park in Lyme Avenue, but I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I don't think it will work, but I think it's just something we have to, for the future, have to be mindful of.
That's what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
So we've got to be aware of what's happened before when the next decision will be based upon what we think. I think that's fair. Look around the area.
In
So,
terms of
yeah,
In
sorry.
terms of this specific application, I'm
No.
not getting any
No.
indication of any serious concerns that would lead to an objection. So, can I take it is no objection and move on?
Yeah, move on.
Yeah.
None for me.
Right. This one should not be more than a passing mention.
There we go. Just talk about it. They're not felling it. They're chopping it by a bit. It's a tree application.
Well, there's no swimming pool.
I would have I have the odd feeling that this might be a fairly straightforward.
Well, I think
Leave it to the tree officer.
applying our normal criteria, indeed, as it's simply a reduction rather than a removal, we would not normally make any comment.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to say no comment and leave it at that.
It's a big laurel, by the way.
So who lives there with the swimming pool?
It's a whopper in the garden there.
Do you know them, David? Swimming pool?
In where? In what?
28B. I'm not sure who's...
In what is the... I have tried to find out the name of the people who do that. I always put the names them up. Look, you've got Ian Watt. Ian Watt was the person who's applied for this. I don't know Ian Watt.
39B, but that was off the thing.
Well, there's the crossing.
I wonder.
Yeah, I was
There's
trying
the
to work
crossing.
it out.
the thing
I didn't
is,
know who anyone had.
it's not actually got a TPO
You'd
on
be
it.
surprised.
I think we're rather more interested in the tree than the swimming pool, although you wouldn't gather that from the discussion. Councillor Oakes, you seem to be pointing in the direction
I'm
of the
just
tree.
trying to work, I'm looking at the crossing to try and work
Try and work out where
It's near
this
the
is
ship.
exactly.
It's the ship, look.
It's the other side. It's just the ship's the other side of that swimming pool. If you really want to know, that's the ship.
Yes.
Oh, that might be David's.
There's the shed. Then you go to there.
Douglas Butler.
No, Douglas is up north.
Yeah, it's further.
Douglas is up
Is it
north.
further?
It's north.
Douglas's is about 80.
The thing that's confusing is the word that says surgery, because there isn't a surgery there.
Is it
What it is, it's behind those huts. You know when you go to the ship and you go down.
You
the
go.
buildings on the
You
right.
have to go through the
It's
door.
behind those,
You have to go through the door. You
People's names and...
have to go through the door and
Yeah.
down the
and it's
road.
behind on the right. Those the sort of a
You'd
combination.
never ever know it was there unless
No.
you decided to go there.
Like it's like Dougie Butler's one.
Bearing
Yeah, yeah.
in mind what we've just said, i.e. that one is not particularly conscious of the existence of this tree, which is only going to be reduced anyway. Can I go back to my proposition that we just say no comment?
Let's go over to... Yes, and move on.
Right.
We look at
And
stuff
unless
like
there's a
that.
surprising
Look at that.
additional application of which I'm unaware,
Oh dear.
Well done.
we've got past the planning, which is
How about that?
very short this evening.
Thank you.
In terms of
How
the
much
numbers.
less stressful at home today?
Fine. Well, thank you for that. That brings us on to the neighbourhood plan, and you will have noticed I am surrounded by bits of paper.
Good luck.
Can I lose the will to live
A
now?
couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting of this committee to which councillors who were not on this committee were invited, and at which we had a presentation of the initial draft by Councillor Stern, who effectively has led the neighbourhood planning group over the last couple of years almost, and Mark Benz. And the document was that.
Yes.
The suggestion we made on that day was that if anybody had any particular observations, stroke questions or what have you, I invited them to get in touch with me over the fortnight that followed. Suffice to say that I had no specific issues raised with me with regard to it. I went through it, and I think you've probably all seen the slightly lengthy document where I went through it and started altering syntax and spellings and typos and one thing and another. There are one or two questions in here, which I'll just touch on in a minute. This has gone to Phil Stern, who was perfectly happy with all the alterations, but then how could you object to saying that form should actually read from, etc. He didn't comment on some of the matters that were raised within here. But the reality is that this was a sort of cosmetic overview. What it wasn't was an analysis of the actual policies in the plan itself, which after all is the meat of it. So the intention tonight will be to go through this, looking at the actual policies themselves. It may well be that we take a view that we don't want to query or seek to alter any of them, but at least if we've been through this process, we'll know.
It's been done.
The intention is that as soon as this committee has reached a point where it can make some recommendation to full council, it will do so. So it is conceivable that depending on the outcome of this evening, we might be in a position to make a recommendation to the next full council meeting later this month. It's fair to say that running in parallel with this process, the plan has been submitted for independent scrutiny through the NPERS process. As far as I am aware, we have yet to receive any feedback from them on that. And I don't know exactly at what point we will get any. So they may have some more fundamental issues with it, or they may not. We don't know. So whatever we say has to be subject to the possibility of needing to look at aspects of this again, depending on that external review. But at least we could look at the various policies that are contained in here. Now, in broad terms, the only policy that most people are going to be that interested in is in the residential side.
Building.
There are other policies that are contained in here, and the second most sort of potentially controversial one will be around sort of green space, open spaces, etc.
Yes.
Partially with that in mind, and prior to tonight, I have circulated 2 lots of historic material, which was by way of background. One was the sort of background paper that I was producing up to July of 2015 on the residential side, which basically takes a history of planning in Oundle from the point of view of strategic planning in Oundle from the 1986 local plan all the way up to 2015. It looks at things that Oundle have recommended in relation to things like design for the future and RNO2P and so on. And indeed the comments that we made into what was then the emerging Joint Core Strategy Review, which of course is now a completed and adopted document. The other one was what was in effect a first draft of a policy around green space, and I felt that it might be worth including it because I wasn't sure that there was as much detail around green space in this document as maybe there could have been. And it also contained a little bit more background for everybody, so all of that's been circulated. So we look at this plan and somewhere along the line we will get to a first policy. One of the things I did query in this, which I haven't had any feedback from at all, is on page 6 of this document there is something called a community engagement timeline,
Yes,
which seems to be something and nothing because it doesn't really give any information, and either it wants to be sorted out and properly completed or it might as well come out of there altogether. What I should add is that this document is backed up by the most ridiculous amount of data collection, which is all available and which will have been supplied as part of the NP's process so that they can see the data from which this has come. And certainly information around community engagement will be in the background material. There may well be merit in including something within this plan, but if it is included, it probably wants to be comprehensive, which is something we can perhaps pick up on in due course. Moving rapidly on, you'll notice the one thing I didn't manage to do is stick any post-it stickers in here to actually find the policies. The vision which is in here is, I think, the vision which a former mayor devised some considerable while ago. It wasn't actually, in a sense, grammatically that easy to read because there was an and that probably would be better included, which I pointed out. But it seems to me that that's been the basis of the document for some time, so it would seem ridiculous to revisit that now unless people felt terribly strongly that there was an issue with it. Moving on, the first policy that you actually come to is OTC1, and it seems as if the sort of numbering strategy is to put an O for Oundle and then some letters that reflect the particular aspect that we're looking at, so TC for town centre and 1 on the basis that it's the first policy. And it's quite a long one. It says, within the defined shopping frontages set out in the town centre proposals plan, there will be a presumption to retain retail uses unless it can be demonstrated that the proposal will add to the attractiveness of the town centre and not critically undermine the predominance of retail on these streets. Town centre uses will be supported within the defined town centre area, subject to this being of a scale and nature consistent with the character of Oundle Town Centre, and that proposals do not individually or cumulatively undermine the focus of retail development. Any external development should accord with the guidance set out in the Oundle Design Statement and Shopfront Design Supplementary Planning Document. Town centre uses outside of the town centre area will require a sequential and impact test as required by the National Planning Policy Framework to demonstrate the proposal will not impact on the town centre's role and function. Last bit's probably the easiest bit because that's almost statutory. I mean, it's part of the whole NPPF and you couldn't actually put in anything that was significantly at variance with that anyway, and we'd agree with it because I suspect we don't particularly want retail development outside of the town centre if we feel it'll impact adversely on the centre. I think I have observed that it would have been more helpful if the definition of town centre uses, which you can find in the joint core strategy was actually reproduced in here, because without anybody understanding what a town centre use actually is, it's a bit difficult to follow the policy.
Yes.
But that seems to me to be a perfectly acceptable policy for the town centre, unless anybody feels differently. I would say that that's...
Is it adding to that you've just said, do we need to define in where the town centre begins and
Yes,
ends? If you see what I mean?
there will be a there is a
They've got a
defined shopping frontage,
They've got
which
a
is
map.
already in existence, if you like. There's a map
where it begins and ends.
Yeah. To which, in a sense, this is referring. There's nothing surprising in that
No, it's fine.
shopping frontages area. It's obviously a smaller shopping frontage than it probably was 30 years ago,
Much.
which went
I mean,
much
went
further up
to
West
the
Street than it now
church,
does.
all the way up West Street
yes,
and all the way up North Street.
It used to run, as Councillor Chesser says, effectively up to the Jesus Church. Whereas
Yeah.
now,
Well, there used to
There
be
was
a
a
shop
spa,
though,
wasn't
didn't
there?
there?
Yeah, no, it wasn't
well, what is
effective
now
at
the
all.
kitchen shop used to be a
Shop.
And there used to be a garage, right?
garage. There used to be a garage beyond that
And
as
the
well.
dairy where Robin Veet lives.
That's right.
There
So things have changed, not necessarily for the better, but on the other hand, this is designed to try and almost protect what we have.
Yeah, I just wondered whether it was whether we ought to be slightly more aggressive in our wording, in the sense of talking about, well, it's all right if it looks pretty, and that's giving in a bit. Should we not be saying that we would do everything we
Well,
can
to be
to
fair, this,
preserve the,
Yeah.
the
I have to
Shops.
say the wording that is in there, and I knew I should have brought this along, but I didn't, mirrors the joint core strategy wording to some degree, as far as I can recollect it, and tends to follow what that is saying. Again, we have a difficulty because our document rests underneath the NPPF, it rests underneath the joint core strategy, and we can't adopt policies that are in contradiction to those. We can develop them, but we can't in effect override them, and that, although I haven't brought the document with me, my recollection is that that broadly follows the thrust
seems
of
a
what
bit
that
soft to
document
me,
says.
a bit.
It is, and it was watered down between the original draft of the joint core strategy and what ultimately came out at the other end. And it's what tends to happen, because the NC get quite bullish when they put these things together initially, and then they panic as it gets closer to inspection time and realise that actually there's no way that the inspector will let some of the stuff go through in the form they've done it, and they've rowed back. And you can see that consistently if you look at the original drafts and what ultimately emerges. They are not as strong, and this was certainly, from recollection, one of those areas where I would say...
but to be fair,
They-
there's room for us, because it says critically not to undermine the predominance of retail and presumption to retain retail use.
Yeah.
So the bias is for retail use, and although we're saying you can't, it gives us the option that's for planning. You can say, well, it's going to critically undermine blah, 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 blah. So we have that option, I think. And I'm not an expert on this, but I think those are our ways of getting around
Yeah, I think that's probably almost as far as it can go. I'm quite happy to maybe try and have a discussion with
whoever needs it.
Councillor Stern. I mean, ideally it would probably be with James Wilson, the consultant, but I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of still being able to use him, because I know there were some cost issues towards the end of a particular financial cycle, but I'm not quite sure where we are with that.
To be fair, if we're going to do changes, it's vital that we get them right now,
Oh,
because this is the bit where you get a tiny bit that can be so vital to the actual result. That's what you're saying,
Yeah.
isn't it?
No, I am.
And
It's contracting. The town itself is growing.
But the centre's
and the
The
contracted.
centre has contracted.
Paradoxically, the shops are shrinking. The shopping area is shrinking.
I mean, I suppose one can only say it's, of course, in line with what is happening everywhere else, but I take it on board. I'll see I'll see whether there is something we can.
The interesting fact would be how
That
much
time.
money has been spent in Oundle in shopping, because there's a variety of other places they can spend in Oundle, and whether that's dropped or not, or gone up, and I suspect it's gone up, but it's just in a different part.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
I mean, things we can't influence is what the shops sell.
Well, I don't know.
No,
Let the flexibility be there.
that's down to market forces.
Yeah.
The next area, and I did make a point around this. Well, there's two things actually, I suppose I'll flag up. One is on page 24, there are references to Fletton Fields and what's going on there. But of course it's slightly difficult because if you incorporate anything into this, it could well be overtaken by events. So I suppose it may depend on exactly when we've finished our processes with it as to where that sits as against the inquiry results, because we don't want this
You don't want it out of date.
apparently out of date. I mean, it is the difficulty, and I mean, in a sense, going back to that background paper on residential, the problem with it was it grew like topsy, because every so often something else would come out and you'd have to start
Absolutely.
revisiting it. Which brings me on to the next policy in here, which is OC1, which says proposals to enhance sports facilities at Oundle School's Milton Road site as part of the sports master plan, including the provision of a sports hall and swimming pool, and make them accessible to the wider community, will be supported. Which does seem to me to be a bit like shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted, because we have been looking at aspects of that master plan for a considerable period of time.
4 years.
And most of that is already done, and I did actually say that I wasn't entirely sure there was an awful lot of point in including that. And I would take some
Although,
convincing that it's...
Is it included because of the fact that the master plan is to integrate the sports more with the town? So that wasn't one of the points of this whole thing, was the fact that it wasn't just for school, it was supposed to open up
It is,
the
but I think the
facilities.
difficulty with that is that that's really part of what you would call a community plan, rather than a neighbourhood plan, which is a planning document. And you can't, under a planning document, particularly dictate to a private owner like a school what it can and can't do, but it
That's
might
fine.
well be incorporated
And I
into
think
a
they
community plan.
might well have got their thing through because they added those few sentences in
Well, that's the
into
reason
the...
They have charitable status, and as part of that, they have an undertaking to supply services to the town.
One of the things that did.
And it's not the only thing,
No.
but it's significant.
And the sports thing will be significant.
And it's significant. I mean, we can threaten them, actually, if they don't actually allow access to their facilities, because that would actually ruin their charitable status.
It'll have an impact on it, yes.
Massive.
The other
Massive.
thing that it has an
Yes, but they've always
impact
been
on
on.
is that when people are counting up how much green space there is in the town, not much of it belongs to the town.
It belongs to Oundle,
It
doesn't it?
belongs to the school.
Yes, I mean that was, again,
Which
if
is
you
one
go
of the
back
things
to...
that came up in the inquiry, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
And actually, that we've, as
Well,
a town, there's
well-
almost no...
The Fretton Field thing is very interesting, because the people who are probably more against it than anybody else is the school. And all you've got to do is just look at a satellite picture and realise that Sanderson and Dryden School and their link in towards, the church, or the chapel, whatever else, you can just see that they don't want to have that, bunged up with 13 houses stuck in the middle. So they are really, you just look at it and logically, you go, whew.
I don't want to get too bogged down in
Yeah,
fields,
Okay.
That's
Move on,
not
it's
the
another-
argument that
yeah.
I was...
because I think, it's arguably something for another
Well-
day. So but I'm conscious of the fact that if we want to finish this before 10 o'clock tonight,
Yes,
we are
please.
going to,
Yes, move
bearing in
on.
mind how many different policies
We're
there
gonna have
are
to
in
move-
here,
Yeah, move on.
Keep
we
going.
don't want to spend
Keep
too
going.
long on
Keep
peripheral
going.
issues. OC2, enhancement of protection of community facilities. This says this: proposals will be encouraged for new and or improved community facilities, and it defines them later, provided that the facility is appropriate to its location, having regard to its use, size and design, impact on traffic, the environment and neighbouring uses. Facility must be accessible by foot and cycle and other non-motorised users. Whether it means uses or uses, I'm not sure. The loss of existing community facilities and any future assets of community value will be resisted unless it can be shown that the facilities are no longer viable or where acceptable alternative provision exists or is proposed. Again, there are echoes of the joint core strategy in the wording of that.
Crikey.
It's difficult to see that one would really want to argue with it either. It seems to be a statement of what we would almost certainly want.
It's an absolute statement.
So, moving beyond that.
The next plan.
to the
Oh, it's a big one. OCR.
Oh, please.
OCR1.
No,
Now, I'm
I've
not
been
going
through
to
this.
actually read it out in full. This talks about the upgrade of existing footpaths and cycleways, and the creation of new sections of footpath and cycleways will be permitted in the following locations as identified in the Oundle Cycle Network study to create a circular route for the town. And then it lists a whole load of areas, and then it says this: allocated development sites for housing will be required to provide land for access and contributions to facilitate the delivery of this pedestrian stroke cycle network. Now,
That is
all
exciting.
of the developers who responded to the call for sites and who've participated in this process are on board with this. It's one of the unusual features of this plan is that we've taken the developers with us, if you like. We've tried to make them partners, but we wanted to get from them items of community benefit, and one of them is this whole idea. It's integral to the whole plan. And it seems to me that an awful lot of work's already gone into this, and it's again something I think that we can be really quite happy with.
And proud of in some respects, because if you get it genuinely pulled off, it would be a real future-proofing to the town.
Absolutely. The next policy, I think, is OH1, so we're into sort of housing type policies at this stage. And it is on residential windfall sites development. Permission will only be granted for small-scale residential developments on windfall, and again, there's a definition of that, windfall sites within the urban area, including redevelopment, subject to meeting all of the following criteria and relevant requirements set out in other policies in this plan and the Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy. And then it lists some half a dozen bullet points. And
Isn't this what we were talking
they
about earlier?
all have to be met. Scale, massing and density of the scheme is in keeping with the character of the neighbouring buildings and the town generally. It does not involve the outward extension of the built-up area outside of the town boundary. Development does not encroach on any local green space. It should be or other open space designation identified within the plan. The scheme will not adversely affect any heritage assets or features, and the design shall be in keeping with the local vernacular as set out in the design statement, and sympathetic materials are to be used. Development will not result in unacceptable loss of amenity for neighbouring uses through loss of privacy, loss of daylight or visual intrusion. Traffic and parking generated by the proposals does not result in an unacceptable direct or cumulative impact on congestion or road and pedestrian safety within the town. And the development provides a beneficial net contribution through the provision of a mix of dwelling types and sizes towards meeting both the market and affordable housing needs of Oundle in accordance with the most up-to-date demonstration of need. It's very comprehensive. It seems to me to hit all the right notes, and unless...
The only thing I'll say is this is exactly what we were discussing earlier on with the bungalow, which wasn't a bungalow,
Yeah,
and the George's two
garages.
garages.
Absolutely.
Do you feel confident that what we were suggesting in that that's covered in that? Is my question. Because this is where we...
Yeah, I think the difficulty to some extent may be this, and it may be that you also have to think about that document, which we are not going to be looking at tonight. It just isn't time. It's clear that this has been drafted on the assumption that there is more, frankly, than one dwelling going onto these windfall sites. So how appropriate it is to the one-off property that is being located in somebody's garden is debatable. Now, it is the case that in an earlier iteration, there was something very specifically about that. And I don't think, as far as I can recall, that there is within this iteration of the document. Now, if people feel that OH1 might need something to cover the single property erected in the garden, or there to be some further policy about single houses in gardens, that could certainly be looked at.
What do you think, folks?
I have to say I quite favour the idea that there is something on that.
Because we were going into slippery territory here. We're talking about the domino effect, and we want to stop the domino effect, where suddenly everybody's got no garden. And that's the worry.
I think it's an important point.
We spent a long time discussing it.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the legal ramifications are of, you know, can you, if you buy a garden, and you buy a house with a garden, and then you want to put 3 houses in your garden, is there, you know, it can be stopped by planning, but can it be stopped by us planning? Does it have to?
Well,
I think
the short answer.
To
Well, the short answer is this. Clearly, the neighbourhood plan and the associated design statement become part of the whole local planning process. If the plan is ultimately accepted by an inspector and passes to referendum and is passed, every planning application in Oundle will have to be judged against this document. That isn't to say they might not find cases where, despite what it says in our document, things go through that we might have expected not to, but at least if it's there, there is some cover for it. So it is an important document. Potentially it could cover this issue, subject to not being in contravention of anything in the National Planning Policy Framework and not being in contravention of anything in the Joint Core Strategy. Now, again, our planning consultant could look at any proposal that we might bring forward that might suggest that, and I see that Hannah is anxious
From an
to.
environmental point of view, looking at your green space section, should you not stop infill when you've got
Concrete
such
jungles.
little green space in Oundle anyway, which you've already identified that Flattened Field is probably one of the only green spaces left?
I think it's really important.
I think it's very important.
Crucial, in fact, because if every single garden, there are some lovely gardens.
Yeah, it's built
If
on.
everyone suddenly got greedy and put the whole nature, the whole town would just change completely.
Well, yes, it's true, because that would then put added pressure on such open spaces there might be.
And flooding.
I mean, if your children can't play in a garden because you've built a house on it, where are they going to go?
No, I think we have, the whole point of this, isn't it, is we're shaping the policy of what, and they have to vote on it, but what we believe Oundle should be. So we're not telling people you can't, but we're saying individuals have to conform to a plan. That's what we're here for, otherwise we just have anything. And I feel very strongly, we had a sort of discussion which shaped the way of where we're going. It's not in there, and I think it should be.
Okay, I will dig out the material I've already got on this, and it looks like it's going to have to be something that we're going to have to take up
It's missing.
with James Wilson. OH2, now we hit the real nitty-gritty consent. This says new housing site allocations. Planning permission will be given for new housing as set out in the table immediately below and as shown on the site allocation plan, and it allocates, as you can see, 7 different sites for residential development. What's more, and perhaps somewhat unusually for a neighbourhood plan, it also indicates actual dwelling allocations on the sites. It's got numbers on it. Now, there's a caveat at the bottom that talks about affordable housing provision should be delivered in accordance with other policies set out in the development plan. One of the difficulties that we might potentially have is that in the paragraph immediately preceding this, it says, with the completion of dwellings since 2011, commitments from planning permissions already granted and remaining sites allocated in the Rural North Handle and Thrapston Plan, a total of 203 dwellings needs to be allocated by 2031. Then it says, it is the intention of this plan to allocate significantly more than this amount to provide for the future growth of the town and to help deliver positive benefits to the community. Now, this is going to be the key question about its acceptability within the town. That's my guess. Because there'll be those who look at that and say, you could have 203, you want another 100 on top of that, we're not happy. And then you may get pressure to look at whether one or more of these developments should disappear entirely. Now, again in my little document there, I suggested that actually it was perhaps important to say, in relation to the remaining sites allocated in the Rural North Handle and Thrapston Plan, that the chances of those coming forward for development between now and the end of the RNOTP period are assumed to be nil. The two sites are the balance of the Ashton Road, Herne Road development and the Dairy Farm, Stoke Hill development, which is about 20 units.
It's only about 20 now. Yeah.
But if you actually were to say in this document that the assumption is that there will be that shortfall, then more expressly, you start to understand why 312 may be taking up some of that allowance from elsewhere that isn't in fact going to emerge. So it's not 312 taking into account those things, it's frankly taking into account the lack of those things. And I think that needs to be
more clearly
emphasised more clearly. It
also
also is the case, and I don't think that this document does it either, that in looking at sites, those two sites have been entirely discounted. In other words, although they are zoned for development in RNOTP, neither of them are brought forward for allocation under our neighbourhood plan. And the reason is it's assumed that they're not deliverable because there has been no sign of a planning application being made. We're being positively told that actually it's highly unlikely there's going to be any planning applications for either side. What's the point of putting them in if they're not likely to happen? So that's why they're excluded. But again, I think it needs to say, and it needs to say right at the beginning here, that that's the reality and that's what it's based upon, to make that clear, because that number starts to look slightly less, I'll put the word in quotes, unacceptable, I think, if you take that into account. Whether it's right to explain that you're allocating significantly more to provide for the future growth of the town and to help deliver positive benefits to the community in that order is a matter of debate. I would have thought that actually one might want to emphasise the positive benefits to the community, because some of these positives that we're going to talk about in a minute will only come if these developers get what they want. And therefore, since there are some positive benefits, which we'll look at in a minute, emphasising that rather more than the future growth of the town, which I suspect is rather less sort of appealing to the people who are already living in it, might be potentially sensible. But there you go.
Be careful, you know, it's about spin, isn't it, almost, because
It is.
because that's going to happen. And I was just wondering, when you were saying about the dairy project at the bottom, I wonder if that's been held back because it's potentially a floodplain bit.
No, it's not in the floodplain.
No.
I've looked
Doesn't
at
that
it.
area get flooded when
It does, but not the actual site. It doesn't
does.
come up as far as the site.
No, it does. It's never come up as far as that.
I just wondered if that's a reason why they're holding back.
No, I don't believe so. Councillor Chester.
Has more recent legislation about not holding land banks affected this? Because Thinking back to when I first came to Oundle 30 years, whatever it is ago, the land on Herne Road, between Herne Road and Ashton Road, was always designated on the old county structure plan as being potential building. It was always there. There was never any great rush to think, okay, we've got to get on and develop that. But it was always there as part of the design, if you like, of the shape of the town. But now they can't hold land banks the same, so
Well, I don't
perhaps
think...
people are unwilling to buy it.
I'm not convinced
Unless they're
actually that
building
you're
it.
right in the sense that I'm not sure that the statutory framework to prevent land banks is yet there. It's certainly being talked about.
But it's certainly...
And it may well be that it will come, but I don't think
but
it's
it
there
might be
in that
affecting how
form.
people feel about it.
It may do. Councillor Oates.
As far as I'm aware, there's no legislation whatever about land banks. I've looked at this. We're talking about a dairy farm, for example. 20 houses, probably maximum built down there, down on Stokedale Road. And yet, we've had 173 built between Ashton and Herne. We got 62, well, we got 145 at the top of our road, 62 down the bottom, and we're starting to, wobble on about 20 houses down a dairy farm. I'm losing the plot. I'm losing the will to live here. I tell you, I'm just losing the will to live.
Well,
I just don't know. I just don't know what to say, to be perfectly honest. The potential 300 up Bennyfield Road. We got another, Millersfield. We got a flipping whole load of stuff that's being piled up. I don't want to sit talking about, 20 down dairy farm, frankly.
well, it's part of the context against which you look at that figure of 312. That's the only point I make.
I understand that.
Let's move on because
Keep going.
time
sir.
presses,
Keep going.
and we have
Doing a good job.
specific site-specific housing policies.
Land east of...
And the first of these is land east of St Christopher's Drive.
Right, brilliant.
This is a plot which Persimmon applied for planning permission on not that long ago. It was
95.
turned down, as Councillor Oates says, 95 dwellings on it. It was turned down, they appealed it, it was turned down again. Interestingly, it was turned down because it was not allocated within RNOTP
Absolutely.
development, and because ENC could demonstrate a 5-year land supply.
Yeah.
In essence, therefore, if sites are not earmarked in this plan for residential development, it is quite likely to be very difficult for a developer to get permission for it going forward. So that's why this document is important.
Agreed.
It is interesting to note in relation to this that the plan is not to develop the full site in one hit. It is effectively to develop half the site. The remaining half is kind of identified for future use beyond 2031. It also has the benefit that means in the first tranche the development is further away from the A605 because of the possible impact of traffic noise, etc., etc. But there is reference at the bottom there to providing suitable noise mitigation measures or setback development. There's also a little bit of help with the Oundle circular route. There's not a massive sort of amount of what I might call straight planning gain within the neighbourhood plan process. There may yet be with SIL/section 106s, which is different again. This would be over and above. The provisions in here may be regarded as over and above. I can imagine the developers are going to try and argue, well, we've already put this into the mix, so, don't hit us too hard. But that's the first site. And I suspect it is a less controversial site going forward than some.
Yeah.
Put it no higher than that. The next site, land south of Herne Road. This effectively is immediately beyond the last house currently in Herne Road, which is more or less opposite the lower entrance stroke exit to Prince William School.
Yeah.
So this development basically joins on to that, and this one is interesting. Funnily enough, it's also 45 dwellings, but potentially of a particular housing type. You'll notice that retirement flats, smaller self-contained houses to be encouraged as part of that development. It will provide approximately 4 hectares of land for recreational sports uses, which could also be used by Prince William School. That was specifically being promoted on the basis of being a possible alternative site for Oundle Cricket Club. Oundle Cricket Club, as you will know, occupies school land on Milton Road, a prime site for the school if it ever wanted to develop a new boarding house. Now, I did read all the articles in
Which
the paper
they do.
earlier this week about boarding has suddenly stopped.
Which they do.
Well, as I say, boarding has suddenly become slightly less popular again after what was described as the Harry Potter effect, but I think the reality is sooner or later the school is likely to want to develop. I can see them wanting to develop that site, and if the cricket club had somewhere else to be, that might be jolly good news.
Christians, aren't
It talks about trying to make
Day school stuff is on the agenda, I know that.
they? A day school.
Well, boarding is dropping off, but private day school is coming up, and Laxton as a school, as a day school, is not, the facilities aren't big
No,
enough.
they're not there. They could put it
So
in
they
there.
want, potentially, rumour is that they will build a, day school, rather than
I'm gonna
a
say-
boarding house. If it's in
Harry's retiring, so maybe we give him a few glasses of wine and have a chat with him.
Right, well,
They've got other places to do
I'm
it.
sure we can spend too much time talking about our
Exactly.
school's
Yeah,
plans.
absolutely.
Um,
Not interested.
So it creates an access which
That's
is
good though.
designed not to conflict with the Prince William access that I just talked about. It takes account of flood risk and on-site drainage issues, and again talk about circular routes and footpaths and so on. So there is considerable, and I'll put the word in quotes, planning gain associated with this site. The next site is Miller's Field, possibly going to be one of the more controversial sites.
Very much so.
Miller's Field currently, of course, provides a nice
Cemetery.
view from Bennefield Road all the way down to
Yeah,
Stoke
it's
Doyle
I'm
Road.
having a problem hearing at the moment, sorry,
Sorry.
because there's 3 other
Okay.
conversations going on.
Which I appreciate you're hearing that bit of a monotone from me at the moment, but I think it's probably the best way of doing it. So this is a site that enables you to see all the way through from Bennefield Road right down to Stoke Doyle Road. It incorporates on the town side of it a small number of private allotments. This has been promoted for a relatively small number of dwellings, 12 units. Again, talking about smaller or retirement homes being encouraged due to its proximity to the centre. About half the site would be provided for allotments and possibly some open space. Some of the designs that I've seen for it include a sort of a pathway down to the brook and some areas that can be walked on.
There's also the issue of the cemetery.
Different site.
Well, I know, but it's on the other side.
It's not directly.
It isn't directly, but there are implications.
We'll come on to the cemetery
Keep
when we
going,
talk
keep
about
going.
the next
David,
site.
was there not an issue with that brook flooding? We had a flood report in, didn't we?
Yes.
Part of the lower part of the site
There's Warren Bridge, isn't it? Opposite.
could have some flood issues. Where the housing is proposed, it wouldn't. But of course, one of the issues is that if you relocate the allotments further down the hill and closer to the brook, is there a risk that the allotments themselves will be unusable because of their proximity to the brook? And I know some of the allotment users have expressed a certain amount of concern
That
about
is what
that.
they've said. They
Now-
are concerned about it.
I'm aware that the Millers have try to take that on board, and I'm sure they will do what they can. But it is an issue that is flagged up. I think they do talk about taking full account of flood risk and on-site drainage issues. It's not as bad as the other side. There was another site 5, which was Spragsfield,
yeah.
which is coming slightly the other way from Stoke Door Road back up towards Bennefield Road, and of course the bottom end of that really does flood.
Does go on.
And that site was actually rejected. It was brought forward, but it has been excluded from this. Millersfield has the advantage of potentially providing better allotments, subject to this drainage issue, than those that currently exist. Clearly it's quite a sensitive site. It would be useful for the development to have sight lines that still enable some views to be had through the development across towards the Stoke Door Road, by the way in which you put the properties on the
Did Mark Bence put this forward originally? I thought that was what part of the design proposal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's that one. The next site is land adjacent to the cemetery at Stoke Door Road. This is a larger development, largest so far of the ones we've talked about, marginally, because this is approximately 50 residential dwellings. Again, bearing in mind the site, bearing in mind this slopes down the other way from the other side towards the brook at the bottom.
Yeah.
So there may be, again, drainage issues to look at, but certainly not on all of the site. The advantage is that the site promoters are willing to offer an extension to the cemetery, which is desperately needed due to the fact that it's almost going to have to become a bylaw that nobody's allowed to die in Angle because there isn't any way to put
Well, I'm going to say we'll have to park them vertically now.
Yeah.
Have to park them vertically.
Can I just ask a question about that? If you build round a cemetery, i.e. you put concrete where at the moment rain falls into soil, is there an impact on your existing burial ground?
It's
There's a potential
it's
you
an
could flood
interesting issue.
I've got an answer. Don't forget, we are due an extensive review of the flooding by this Northamptonshire County Council. So it's important then that when they do it, they reflect the plans, and then we can answer the questions. So that's something I haven't got a date for that. I couldn't make the meeting, but that's on the plans. It should be this year, and that'll be a proper survey, which we don't think we've had actually.
Well, the only thing I can say is if you go into In My Area on the Northampton or the ENC website, you can click on a thing that shows you where our floodplain is.
Yeah.
And that tells you a great deal about where the water goes when things get a bit nasty. And
But that'll be updated.
All of those.
it needs updating, but obviously, I mean, even silly things like, well, not silly, but even the fact that Waitrose had plonked their place there has an effect in some way upon the floodplain in that area. But they were able to build it because they were able to show that they weren't theoretically going to affect the floodplain. But the floodplain data has not been updated because I checked on it only the other day. It's not reflected the changes that have happened down there. So I don't know. I mean, the whole point about floodplains is that if an awful lot of water comes down, it's got to go somewhere. And what you don't want it to do is go rushing through, you know, whatever. It goes into a field and that acts like a rather large sink. And it sits there until you pull the plug out and the water goes down. I mean, not the best explanation I can give really, but I know a lot more about this than meets the eye actually.
Certainly, you know, when the site assessments of the individual sites were being considered, one of the things that we obviously took on board was the whole flood risk
Well, it has to be right.
area.
It has to be.
So
There isn't
I
any
would not
valley.
expect any of these sites to struggle to get permission on flood grounds, although it may be, for example, with this one, I don't know,
Actually,
I'm
there is
not
one
technically
that will.
qualified, you know, whether they suddenly discover that actually fitting 50
This
on is
one
difficult,
will.
but they can get
This
40
one
on.
This one will.
Which one's that?
Herne Road, because do you remember the floods a couple of years ago?
Herne
When
Road?
I went down,
Oh, yeah, I remember when the roundabout
we were literally going to evacuate people from the houses, all right? And if you go back to that map of Herne Road, where you've got the houses here, I can't really show you, but that whole area was a half a mile wide river.
I'll tell you what, send that to me. I'll put that up so we can see it.
It was an unusual event. I mean, you were fine because you're higher up,
Yeah.
but all those houses at the bottom.
Oh, well,
I couldn't believe it.
the one,
They flood every few years.
But it was the river that had gone to
Absolutely.
the one of the first house at Riverside
all
Close,
that was a river.
where Val lives, you know, it was flooded. It really came right up. Sue's actually lived in South Road when the water has washed up.
Yes.
And it came through the dry stone
It's
wall.
this-
But
these
that
are-
house was
It's
sold with
the-
no worries.
Yes, it's not just the river flooding, it's the water table that
Yes.
people forget.
I just couldn't believe
Well,
that.
it's
We had a massive river that it wasn't half a mile, but it's about 400 metres wide. And if you went in
My
it,
road's on the floor, on
Yeah.
the
it was
water
nasty
table.
that. And that's only one, that's a rare event.
Yeah, not that
Yeah, but the trouble is they're starting to become more
Yeah.
regular, aren't they?
Well,
Right,
again,
David, yes.
bearing in mind
Sorry about
that
Strange,
for
isn't it?
most of these sites, where there is a
Suggested.
potential flood risk issue, we have kind of flagged it up.
Yes.
Clearly, there will be some technical input in due course into that. Again, ENC are aware of those things and they haven't come back to us and said, for example, oh, there's no chance of developing that site because. So, there we
Okay.
are. The next site is land south of Wakerley Close. Small development, this time around 10 dwellings, rather the opposite of the sort of thing that we've looked at Miller's Field, for example. These would probably be larger properties with larger gardens, and again a little bit of issues around footpaths and so on.
Is that what the purple? Sorry, David. Is that the purple thing? Is that the footpath?
Long straight line down.
Is the long? Well, sorry, I've got it.
Right. I
You're
find it
black and
difficult
white.
because I've only printed it off in black and white.
So,
It's just too complicated and expensive to print it off in
It's all
colour.
right. No, I was just wondering.
That purple
I
footpath.
can't remember off the top of my
No,
head.
some of these have a purple line.
Yeah. I think that
And
probably
there's a blue
is.
line that delineates the boundary of the building.
that's the boundary. That's
I
the
suspect the
boundary.
purple line looks like the footpath they're talking about.
Okay.
I think that's a footpath.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The next site is by far the largest site.
Oh God!
This is land north of Benefield Road, providing for around 120 dwellings. Again, the suggestion that some larger dwellings might be possible because of the amount of space there is up there.
I thought they were going to go for 300 at one point.
That was what they asked for.
Right.
It's not what they're getting. Nobody is getting what they asked for virtually.
Yeah,
because
but
most of these sites
is my memory
have been-
correct?
Yes. In fact, you know, it could take more than that even. But 300 was the number. This is providing for 120. Still a substantial development.
This is Biggins Farm, isn't it?
Yeah. This is going to have the plan is to have a community festival field there, so that events which have previously relied upon the school providing
School,
land
yeah.
or the use of the land down by the wharf could actually be taken in essence in-house
Lovely.
by there being land made available for that purpose. Again, some talk around footpaths and the like. I've got to come back in a minute to talk about that in
Okay.
just a moment.
Moving on.
To look at the last of the sites, which is
Hey, dog.
land east of Cottesloe Road,
Yeah.
effectively north of St Peter's Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's that?
This is a huge potential site. It's a complicated site because the parish boundary between Oundle and Clapthorne runs right through it, and therefore on the Oundle side of it there is a capability for around 140 homes. On the Glatthorne side of it, a capability for around 60, a total of around 200. It is mentioned in our NOTP as one of 2 sites which might be suitable for development going forward. It wasn't allocated in any way, but it was kind of flagged up. The proposal is for a very limited amount of development, as you will notice, which runs behind, in essence, the properties that already front Cotterstock Road.
Can I just ask a sort of semi-technical question? Because obviously it's right near the sewage farm, and it's also quite slopey, and there's a potential for all sorts of underground springs and stuff there.
Underground springs on that side.
That's what I thought.
The site has some difficulties.
Yep, quite.
If you look at the photograph, up as it were at the sort of top middle, you are moving towards the sewage works. There is a presumption in favour of a cordon sanitaire around the sewage works, within which you do not create residential development. Having lived in St Peter's Road for 30 years, I can tell you that when the wind occasionally is in a certain direction, one is aware that there's a sewage farm not that far away.
It takes the waft
It has been known to.
Also having to pump it out regularly.
So you've got that quote-unquote constraint. It is a very, very sloping site.
It is.
When it came forward back in 1986, in the then local plan, as being talked about, Anglian Water did not like it because of issues surrounding drainage and the underground springs and strange sort of ground flow, etc. Furthermore, I am aware, although this is not strictly a planning ground, that at least 2 of the properties fronting Cotterstock Road have restrictive covenants which prevent the development of the land to the rear, going down roughly half the way down the field, much further than the proposed development. On the face of it, the developer may be forced to buy up some of the houses on Cotterstock Road to try and effectively extinguish that, which means that there are certain people sitting on a load of money, potentially, which is not a planning issue specifically, but it's just interesting.
Yes.
This is for a development for far fewer houses than the developer wanted.
Very much
we
so.
thought we were going to have difficulty over that issue. However, when it was pointed out to them that there was the possibility that if they didn't take what they were given, they might get nothing at all allocated because of the way that the numbers work and the fact that there are other sites that could be developed, I'm told that they came back into line and said, okay, and you'll notice that there's, again, some all footpath work. When the development was going to be potentially bigger, there was also going to be some green space provided, but I don't think that's really part of the current plan. Now, before we move further on, let me remind you of this. Quite a long time ago now, a questionnaire was delivered to every single house in Arundel. There were questions on all aspects of the neighbourhood plan, which included, not surprisingly, both residential development and open space. And people were given certain options to indicate a preference for or otherwise. I have to say that it does strike me that, depending on how you slant a question, you can probably guarantee an answer. And arguably, the options that were presented may very well have influenced the way in which the results subsequently came out and have been interpreted.
It's inevitable.
They are set out in here in the sense that they are referred to. And in essence, 2 things were said to have emerged. One was that there was a wish to have development essentially restricted to an area approximately no more than a mile from the centre.
Yep.
The second was a stated preference for development to be spread around a number of sites around the town rather than concentrated on one or more larger sites. Now, I'll be frank, it strikes me that one issue that may arise is that this whole plan is based on that reading of those research results. It's based on it in the sense that it puts forward a number of developments spread around the town, most of which are of a small or modest size. Okay, you probably argue 120 isn't small or modest. On the other hand, it's smaller and more modest than 300 or so. It is conceivable that either we as a council or the town subsequently might take a look at this and go, don't like that. We would rather have certain of these sites that don't have development on them at all, and put more development onto certain other sites. For example, you could put the entire allocation onto Benfield Road North if you wanted to. It'd be completely contrary to that reading of the questionnaire results, but you could do it. You could put 90 houses instead of the 45 onto the St Christopher's extension. The development around the cemetery could take a lot more. The land north of St Peter's Road, Gloucester Road could take much more, etc., etc. One of the interesting things around that survey result was in relation to Miller's Field, where there was quite a lot of anti-development of Miller's Field feeling, I think it's fair to say, and a feeling that it should be, basically kept as it was, but with allotments and so on being available there.
Definitely.
What is there is sort of allowing some development but trying to retain some openness and the allotments. The other site, which was extraordinarily controversial, was the last one.
Yep.
Between those who thought, well, in a sense it looks relatively obvious. You've even got on St Peter's Road, if you know the road, on the flatbed, before it turns at 90 degrees and goes up the hill, there is an extension to the road that was built there in the 60s to carry on the development, which has never been carried on. So it's always looked as if it could be developed. But it has to be said that there was quite a lot of people saying, don't develop that area, keep it open because of the extension into the countryside, the very sloping nature of the site, the fact it slopes down to the river, blah, 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 101 things. Now, it's also probably fair to say, and I think Mark Benz made the point at the meeting we had earlier, which is that if you analysed where the objections came from, quite a lot of the objections came from people who lived in the area. Not exclusively so, but certainly probably more objections came there, although it was interesting, it was one of the most popular sites to be undeveloped, as it were, and kept as an open, which seemed to probably therefore suggest that the feeling was wider. Now, the issue for us in looking at those housing policies, and I've taken us right through all of the 7 sites, is this: we are charged with recommending to the town council whether this plan, with possibly minor changes or what have you, is taken forward, or whether we want to recommend something different. So the key question for us is, are we on board with what's in here, or do we want, in a sense, to say, look at it again? I'll come to you in one moment.
Okay.
There will obviously be huge ramifications if we turn around at this stage and start querying some of this. The ramifications are going to be twofold. One, there's going to be considerable delay. Associated with 2, Councillor Stern, Mark Benz and others who put a lot of effort into trying to get us to this point have intimated on more than one occasion that if this is not broadly accepted, they are likely to walk away from it. Now, that may or may not be a problem. You may feel, well, it can all be taken in-house now, but it would be disappointing. The other fact is, of course, this. If you've been negotiating with various developers and saying you can have this, you can have that, providing you give us... And then all of a sudden, after the neighbourhood plan group does all of that on our behalf, we turn around and say, actually, you know what, you can't build on that. We're not having it. We don't want to allocate it. There are going to be ramifications which will probably lead to challenges of a legal nature in due course to this plan. So, we may take the view that despite that, we have an issue. We may take the view that in terms of publicising this plan, if we put it forward as is, one of the things that we might want to look at is whether we say to people, this is what it's going to be. An approach favoured by Councillor Stern, who said, well, we want to consult, but we don't basically want to listen to them and do anything about it because, you know, it is what it is and we want it basically to go through. Or whether one says to people, look, you know, we have taken on board what you said, this is what it results in. If actually you don't like this, it's about time you told us so and told us what you prefer if. But the implication of that is that if you have that consultation and if the town came back with a resounding, actually we don't like this, we are, I won't say back at square one, but I don't think we're going to be much beyond square two, because we are literally going to have to start from scratch. Councillor Oakes was first and Councillor Ford.
Okay. I think we should endorse it as it is, without mucking about, frankly. There are other issues, not least of which we're having a whole load of buildings stuck on the back of Corby, which are approaching us. I can't see anything wrong with this document, personally, having looked at it. And of course, I'm intimately, you know, I know all of these sites, and I'm pretty, you know, I'm pretty sure I know pretty well what's likely to happen. I don't like it very much, but we've got the government sitting on us, which says build, 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 and we're basically going to have to actually, you know, take our medicine on this one. And I think there's a lot of things that have gone on behind closed doors. A lot of deals have been done with the developers. I've not been a party to any of that, but as far as I'm concerned, the document, with maybe a few minor amendments, is fine, and I'm perfectly prepared to oppose it.
Councillor Ford.
I agree. I think we've got the data, and I know you're saying it could be read wrongly, but I remember partaking in that survey, and I think it was an important step, and I think we could be quite justified in saying, well, this is the plan that came about from the survey. We've listened, we've acted, it may have taken a few years, but actually, that doesn't matter. We went to the town, this is what they've given us, and that's the plan we got. I fully endorse it.
Just a point, is there any, you know, sentences we can put in there, because it's actually changed. No, but it has actually changed, because all the farmland between the end of the town, where the sewage was, all the way across to Gladford, has now been bought, since this has happened, has now been bought by Persimmons. So that they are that whole that is all now
Absolutely.
out to rape is now potentially one vast
building site.
Can I interject here? Because tomorrow night there is a meeting between Arundel, Gladthorne and ENC. It's a further meeting of a series of meetings, because Gladthorne is developing a neighbourhood plan. We are developing our neighbourhood plan. Gladthorne are very keen to ensure that their neighbourhood plan effectively dovetails with ours, and to some degree vice versa. It's fair to say that Gladthorne have an even bigger problem proportionately than we do.
Certainly.
If we are proposing around 300 houses when there were roughly 1,200 units being kind of sought, the proportion in Gladthorne is, I think, closer to about 7 to 1.
Yeah.
part of the difficulty for that is not actually almost any of the land that Councillor Humphreys mentions, because it's not going to be brought forward in the current wave of developments. But there are still sites which are being actively promoted to Glapthorne because they sit in Glapthorne parish. One is with reference to site 23 again, that part of site 23 which lies in Glapthorne parish, where Living Land would love to put 60 houses. The thought of Glapthorne being there and a mile down the road in another direction seems to me to be absolutely barking. I think it's likely that what is emerging in Glapthorne is that it would be absolutely barking. There is also land in the ownership of Charles Lane on the other side of the road, just beyond the school, which has also been promoted. It was initially promoted to this council as part of our neighbourhood plan, except that about 1 square foot of it lay within Oundle parish and the rest of it was in Glapthorne. So we said, well, we can't possibly consider it, it's not in our parish. So it's landed in Glapthorne's lap, and the same considerations apply to that because of its physical dislocation from the village and its size, as does the Living Land. There is also a development, as you are aware, as you come out of Oundle towards Glapthorne and Southwick, on the left-hand side, which, in fact, although it appears to be an extension to Oundle, is in Glapthorne parish, and there is a proposal to further extend that site backwards towards Glapthorne village.
That's Waggy.
Wagstaff Field.
Is that the Jackson's houses on the...
No, it's Waggy's, that's Wagstaff.
It's Jackson.
Builder,
I think he's the one who's they're using.
It would be relatively small scale, and it certainly wouldn't stretch all the way back to Glapthorne. And it's very clear that Glapthorne is anxious for there to be no coalescence between Glapthorne and Oundle, and have been bombarding me with things in relation to that. And you will see when we get on to any other relevant matters for report that we'll be talking a little bit more about that briefly.
Good.
In terms of what's here, as opposed to, in a sense, what isn't, so far I've had 2 people being positive about it and nobody saying anything.
I'm positive.
I'm positive.
I'm positive as well. It's just a question of, things change. In 10 years' time, they'll come round and
it's fair to say,
they will all be dead or something. I suppose.
Well, I think,
to do is
yes,
remain in charge.
there will also be an ongoing responsibility to keep the plan under review.
Yeah.
In the same way as RNOTP is not surviving until 2021 and is going to be replaced by a new second-tier local plan, which will actually not just be sort of Oundle and Thrapston, but will actually be all the towns.
I
So it'll be
think
Lawrence and Rushden
you've
and so on
summed
and
up
so
what I was trying to intimate is the fact that as long as the town is aware that this document is subject to change and can be and is out of our control.
Yes, I mean certainly it is out of our control because governments can effectively ride roughshod over it if they choose to. Councillor Oakes.
Well, the other thing is that we are also subject to things outside our parish, which affect us, not least of which is our 2 rather large developments in Corby. We don't know how that's going to affect us, both in terms of the construction and also the movement of traffic and where they might go. And there's nothing we can do about that. It's nothing we can do about any planning matter, actually. That's one of the most irritating things about this, I find, is that we can say, well, we don't like this, but we don't have any kind of... The one thing I like about the neighbourhood plan is at least it might give us a little bit more muscle.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm at.
I'm going to try and keep going because we have
keep going.
A few more policies to look at.
Oh God, have we?
I have to tell you, we have probably broken the back of it. I think the next one isn't going to be particularly controversial. Policy O.ES1. I should perhaps ask a quiz and see if you can work out what it relates to. But
Sorry.
ES is employment sites. And it says simply this: existing employment sites at Nen Valley Business Park, East Road and the Wharf, shown on the policies map, will be safeguarded for employment uses unless it can be demonstrated that these uses can no longer be sustained.
Well, it's a bit
It's
straightforward.
very straightforward. I should say that one of the difficulties that we had with this was it was very difficult to get business to engage with the process prior to the questionnaire, and there wasn't that many responses to the questionnaire that really came from a sort of business standpoint. Nobody promoted any land for employment use at all. We did look at one possible site, but there were issues with it. May have been some drainage, flooding issues, bearing in mind where it was. There was an issue possibly about its proximity to Laxton's junior school, and the fact of the matter was it was all in the ownership of Oundle School, who weren't frankly that interested in promoting it. And after having had some discussions with Oundle School and it being perfectly apparent that they had no particular plans to want to seek to develop that commercially, this plan actually doesn't propose any new employment land at all anywhere, because we couldn't. But that policy seems to me to be a simple one. The next one is somewhat less simple and possibly as controversial as the housing ones, although we seem to be quite happy with the housing ones, so that's perhaps no bad thing. And it's O.LGS1.
And yes, is
local green spaces. There's a little list. It's set out in here, and it identifies various areas which we want to prevent from being developed. Land surrounding St Peter's Church, pretty obvious when you think about it. Oundle Town football pitch, Oundle School sports facilities and playing pitches, the land surrounding Oundle School chapel and garden adjacent to the Great Hall. I did actually point out that it seemed to me that they were two separate tracts of land, and it might be sensible to put Viney's garden separately to the other one. Oundle School playing area and water meadow, Fletton Fields recreation ground.
Yes.
Big question mark, of course, about that in the circumstances. Oundle Town Cricket Club, Oundle Town Rugby Football Club pitches, bowls club and tennis club, Snipe Meadow, and Oundle Pockets. It says Stake Park, but I'm pretty sure it should have said Skater Park, and recreation area.
I don't have a problem with any of those.
One of the things I circulated was the sort of green space thing. It contained a bit of an analysis of kind of where the green spaces were and who actually was responsible for what. And some is in, quite a bit of it's in Oundle School ownership, some of it's in the state school ownership, some of it is in our ownership. It doesn't designate as a green space any sites which were proffered for development but which haven't been allocated for development, e.g. Spraggs Field coming down towards Stoke Law Road, for example. Much less does it suggest kind of non-development on any of the development sites. Now, we've already said we approve the development sites, so by definition we're not now going to suddenly turn around and say site 11 Willers Field should be regarded as an important space and not developed on, because it would be somewhat inconsistent. There are obviously one or two issues surrounding all of this. I don't think Oundle School are going to have any particular problems with anything that we're proposing of theirs that shouldn't be developed residentially, because I don't think there's anything there that they would have plans to develop residentially in
Prince William School?
Future point. Prince William School, it does not refer to the Prince William School playing fields. Maybe it should.
I think so.
Of course it should.
If you look at the green space paper I circulated, you'll see it makes references to specifically to the Prince William School. Admittedly, it goes back to some documentation. I think of itself goes back to 2007 now, so it's somewhat out of date. But it's about the most recent documentation of its kind that exists.
We ought to stamp that. Really ought to stamp.
And of course, you might want to designate as local green space areas like the bottom end of Site 3, which is going to be put forward for as part of that development, which ought to presumably remain green space,
yes.
as should, of course, the
What about
the festival field as part of
well,
the
I'm
Bank
going
of
to say
Redmore
that's
site.
another interesting one.
So they're not mentioned here, and arguably perhaps they should be. You may argue that it's almost self-evident.
What about our primary school as well now?
Yeah, there's a big debate there.
There's a big debate on that. Don't you think we should throw? I mean, it
Well,
might upset
again,
Heather Smith a bit.
I have to
but
say, in the paper that I keep referring to, the original group, what I'm going to call the original Green Space paper, there was reference in there to the fact that some councillors here at least will remember that this council unanimously backed the campaign to resist residential development
absolutely.
on county council owned land
We did.
forming part of the middle school stroke primary school complex. The county council are still desperate to sell it off. They want the money. If we put it in here, we have a greater possibility of
Keeping it.
resisting it.
Let's stick it in there.
And it
then.
isn't here
Stick it
currently. So I do wonder whether we might want to discuss with
Yes.
Please.
the others what I might call omitted land.
Yeah.
Because, I think there are some interesting ones. Fletton Field is obviously slightly difficult because...
But I think
If we put that in there, will it make it more difficult?
Well, if...
Put it
Well, let's put it this way. If the public inquiry comes down in our favour and then we include it in here, yes, we're you know, I wouldn't say we're home and dry, but you know, we're as close as we're ever going to be to being home and dry. If, on the other hand, the public inquiry goes against us, there is likely to be a further planning application. It may still be resisted, and it may still be lost on the basis of some of the arguments that came up before. And depending on timings and as to when this came out, if we got this through with Fletton Fields being regarded as an important open space before it ever got any planning permission granted on it, then it might snooker the planning permission. So at the moment, I think the answer is yes, we would want to incorporate it.
Absolutely.
Indeed, I think we
I think-
struggle publicly to explain why we haven't included
can I
it.
just say, this is impossible. We have to. Full stop.
Yeah.
We endorsed it as a council, but the people who really are going to be the big spear chuckers in this are Arundel School, because they don't want the development there.
They certainly don't. Right, let's move on.
So you're going to list. Sorry, just to clarify. You're going to list those things that we've
I'm
mentioned.
going to come up with some potential additions and then discuss it with
Yes,
them
okay.
about why those things aren't there, whether there are some particular practical reasons why they're not included,
They
but
should be.
pointing out that we would like them to be included.
We've already had battles about them.
Exactly, yeah. Right, O.V1, V1 is not a
O.V1.
rocket. V1 is views to historic buildings and
Yes.
landscapes, and I don't think this is going to be controversial. Development across the neighbourhood plan area must have regard to identified local views set out in Appendix X. Admittedly, at the moment, there isn't an Appendix X, which I have pointed out will need to exist by the time that this document goes public, but
Hang on a minute. Can you just repeat that? Views. I mean, I remember reading this and I thought,
right.
what does that
We're
mean?
talking-
And where are we going here?
Well,
what
we're
sort
talking
of
about
views?
view corridors, and they may be views out of the town into the countryside, or from the countryside into the town, or even conceivably views within the town
The
itself.
I mean, you've got everything from the church spire.
Church spire is interesting because, again, I have to say, within the JCS, there are references to the important views of things like church spires from the Nen Valley and from the river, and
You could go mad with this, though, because I mean,
Yes,
I've
you
got
could.
photographs of pretty well every single house, you know, in the conservation area, including, you know, lion, you know,
I think
all
the-
sorts of stuff.
yeah.
What does that mean? I'm a bit worried about this one, because basically that could be a picture of every single house down North Street.
I don't
And down
think-
West Street.
Yes, it's. I don't think it's talking about necessarily quite that. But for example, if somebody wanted to build a building that would impact upon the view that one might have, so you could argue, for example, if Fletton Field was developed, and depending on exactly how and where it was, it might impact upon the views across to Andrell School Chapel, which is, of course, a Grade 2 listed building.
Can I give you an example?
By all means.
Quite a few years ago, when they were proposing to build the Spire Homes houses that you hit as you come in from Corby along Bennyfield Road, and for some reason totally unknown to any of us, they built the tallest houses in a position which completely blocks the view of the church spire and the approach to the town. I mean, that was a travesty of planning, absolute travesty.
Yeah.
That's the sort of
Thing that
thing
we're trying to
we're
guard
talking
against,
about,
yes.
that we're guarding
The
against.
supermarket.
Right.
Councillor Oates?
Can I just say, in all my research on this, it would appear that the fact that you block somebody's view is not considered a planning matter.
Strangely enough, it's not considered a planning matter in the sense of a view from a private dwelling necessarily being protectable.
Correct.
However, if you read the Joint Core Strategy, this, I have to say, is in line with aspects of that document and NPPF. It is recognised that there are occasions when what I might call public views, I think it's the best way of describing it, public views
Right.
could and should be protected as opposed to
I'm
private
only
views.
making the point that I'm just wondering whether, by making sure we put this in the document, that we can strengthen the view about that. Because in doing all the matters I've done with planning, I've known that the fact that somebody sticks the building up, which blocks a view that somebody else has got doesn't have any planning thing at all. It just doesn't.
That's right, it's what I would call a private view as opposed to a
Absolutely.
public view.
But I think this is something that, I mean, I think Historic England would have something to say about if we...
Well, they certainly would.
As an old market town, if we started blocking the view of the church as you
The
approach
vista.
the town
Like-
from every
yeah.
direction, they would have something to say about that. So it's actually very important.
There we go.
I'm going to quote from David's document, because I've got it in front of me, and it describes view corridors very nicely. Do you mind if I quote from that?
By all means.
There are many examples of important view corridors in the town. They include the important long-distance view from the top of St Peter's Road, a characteristic high point in the town, from which location are visible the fields and trees in the Nene Valley east towards Ashton Road. There are similar stunning long-distance views from the top of Bellamy Road, Lime Avenue, Springfield Road, St Wilfrid Road, Nene View, and New Road, in addition to the view from Cotterstock Road referred to above. These views offer important relief from the tight urban form and hard surfaces.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good statement.
I mean, even coming in from Stoke Doyle, if you come on Stoke Doyle Road from there, and you can see the church and
Yeah, that's it.
even
And,
the
well,
copper dome of St Anthony's
and the golf course.
and all those bits are important historic views.
It's interesting actually, just to pick up on that point.
Go on.
Go back to the questionnaire, and one of the areas where people were very keen to prevent development was Stoke Doyle Road, because of the views that are considered to be
They're
important
lovely.
of the approach to the town and of leaving it.
Well, I have sold no end of grave spaces to people because they want the view of the Catholic Church.
Really?
If you interfere with that, you're going to have a real
You'll have a
problem.
lot of
Oh, they
problems.
don't.
There we are.
That's
We'll
what
get
I
all
mean.
Rise from the dead and
I was going to say, we won't really, because they're dead. But
The relatives are.
Relatives.
I've
Right.
never understood why we've got that developments. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We're
Clearly
gonna have
we
to,
need
David,
to understand Appendix
how long are
X.
you going to go? Because we're probably going to have to leg it.
We haven't got that many more to go, and I don't think they're probably
Zoom.
they're probably that controversial. OT1, which is tourism uses, bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation, it basically talks about appropriate scale sustainable
I read that
tourism
bit.
development proposals
Yeah.
and or extensions to or the expansion of existing tourism uses will be supported through the neighbourhood plan area in
No
principle.
trouble. Right.
Proposals relating to land beyond the settlement boundary will need to demonstrate the use proposed will not have an adverse impact on the rural landscape. Proposals should not significantly impact on neighbouring uses, provide sufficient car parking related to use, and then it goes on about changes of use to provide B&Bs is a good idea. I don't think we're going to particularly argue about
Fine.
that. OT2, achieving high quality design, I won't bother to read it all out in detail. It's quite developed, and it talks about, by reference to the AMP design statement and so on, which seems to me again to be sensible. OT3, festival site off Benefield Road, site of approximately 5.5 hectares in size. In the general location identified in policy H2F, it's allocated for the purpose of hosting festivals and events for the benefit of the community. Access to be provided separately from any adjacent residential development and associated development to enhance the infrastructure of the site for this purpose, e.g. provision of utilities, car parking and temporary structures will be permitted. So that's really a bit of self-interest to try and ensure that we've got a user.
We've got a place where we control it.
And what's more, it's a bit like the coming to nuisance argument. As somebody who follows motor racing quite closely, there's quite a lot of problems for motor racing circuits with residents who move in next to Brands Hatch and then start complaining about the noise of racing cars. And they have done surprisingly well in trying to restrict things. So, you know, at Mallory Park and various other circuits, there's quite a lot of restrictions on use because of noise nuisance from people who actually choose to go and live next to a motor racing track. We could have a similar situation around the festival site, because even though people will know it's there, they might start to complain about its use. Whether there's some way of dealing with that, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll just sort of flag it up in advance. Developer contributions, well again, that's pretty self-explanatory. It basically wants to talk about getting contributions towards pedestrian and cycleway enhancements, public realm and highway improvements, establishment of infrastructure to support towns' festivals, new allotment space and open space provision, transport and parking provision, etc. I just actually wonder whether, even with an extension to the cemetery, there ought to be perhaps something around getting developer contributions, because we may ultimately have to look for a further site completely. And so I do just wonder whether we might just want to add in.
So
I was thinking
I better
that
book
one
your plot.
down to the sewage works, but if it's got underground springs, it's no good.
Can I book
Maybe
your
a bit
plot?
problematic. It is perhaps worth noting that when the site, excuse me a minute, when the site north of Benefield Road was being proposed by its promoter for 300 odd houses, one of the things that it talked about was a woodland burial site. That's disappeared because he hasn't got the numbers. Although I should have said that rather similarly to the St Christopher's Drive development, there is an area of land between what we are zoning for development and between the existing Creed Road development, which we are suggesting may be suitable in the longer term so that the development essentially joins up. Although unfortunately, because of the way it works, it's never going to join up with vehicular access.
No.
But there can be footpaths and cycleways, what have you. So I think that perhaps developer contributions might be needed for that, and happily that's the last policy. It does seem to me that there are one or two things that we might want to add stroke clarify, but I haven't got that many notes.
Just one, before you go on, before it flips out of my head, right at the very, very beginning, David, you said about the little table of public consultations. Because it came up in the town council meeting about how much has the town been, would it be a good idea to enhance it and so it was...
Good point, yes. I mean, I think it certainly
Rather than-
can't stay as it
rather than-
is.
What a suggestion was that it should be taken out completely, perhaps.
Well, either taken out or
Or enhanced.
Or enhanced.
I agree totally with
And I
that.
think
We should emphasise.
once we've seen what it would look like in an enhanced form, if it looks impressive, I think it goes in. If it
Absolutely.
doesn't, it doesn't. And I think that's probably the
Yeah,
answer.
no, I mean, and I say that solely because it came up
Yeah.
from two,
And I think
well,
that's
at least two people, didn't it? In
It's
the,
very
We can
worthwhile.
always then refer anybody to it if they question whether that was there.
No, just before I just suddenly remembered. And thank you, David. I must say,
Yeah,
that's-
thank you.
It's
Yeah.
impressive the amount of work you've done.
Thank you. Right.
One last thing.
In terms of trying to take this forward, then I will see whether I can tie this together and perhaps contact Phil Stern and find out by talking to Emma where we are with James Wilson, because I can see that it might be useful for me to have a meeting with him.
For you tomorrow, I think.
Right, good. On a purely practical level, unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm going away on holiday next week, so I'll try and get things done before I go away.
Where are you going?
Madeira.
Lovely.
Very nice.
Tough.
Yeah. Weather there looks a bit sort of iffy at the moment, but never mind.
Nice wine.
I don't... Good, that sounds excellent. Might not stray that far from the bar then. Right, I don't think there's anything more... Oh, yes, there is. Neighbourhood plan. I should perhaps, in advance of the meeting that we are having, at least I am having tomorrow.
Oh, right, yes.
I think the Mayor may be joining me.
I will.
Moral support.
Glapthorne were very keen to understand our sort of policies insofar as it related to residential development, insofar as it kind of impacted on what I might call the border areas, etc. And I kept having to say to them, well, look, it's a bit problematic. Firstly, at that point, when it was first raised, we didn't even have a draft. And then I pointed out, well, although we've got a draft, it isn't yet an approved draft. So I can't go around sending you a copy of it or telling you that we've agreed X, Y, or Z, because we haven't yet. And they're a bit miffed that we haven't sent them one. I sent them, having discussed this with the Mayor, a brief response, which I'll just read to you. It's just said, Oundle Town Council's Planning Committee received a draft neighbourhood plan from the town's neighbourhood plan group on the 6th of April 2017. The committee will now be considering the draft with a view to deciding whether to recommend the plan as drafted to the full council or to seek to revise it before doing so. Once the draft plan has been approved by the full council with or without revision, copies can be provided to the clerks of neighbouring parish councils. It is hoped that the draft plan will be considered by Oundle Town Council at a special meeting to be arranged sometime in May. It is beginning to look a little optimistic. The draft plan looks at, amongst other things, residential development in the parish of Oundle for the period 2011 to 2031, and it's clear that developer interest has been such that there is no difficulty in allocating sites for residential development within the parish, which will more than satisfy the requirements of the recently adopted Joint Core Strategy. For this reason, Oundle Town Council would request that in considering site allocation in the parish of Glapthorne, the Glapthorne Neighbourhood Plan Group should exclude sites that are remote from the current built environment of the village and border the current built environment of Oundle.
Ooh.
Except that we've had a response from them. Now,
That's a good one.
I read out my response to them. We've had this enormous thing back.
I haven't seen
Um,
that.
No, haven't you? No, perhaps I should read it then.
Oh, no, please don't
I'll
read it,
summarise it as best I can.
Please.
So they said it's a response to my email, and they say this, they're disappointed with our statement. Glapthorne has sought on a number of occasions to engage constructively on issues of considerable importance to both of our neighbourhood plans.
Fine.
Unfortunately, the statement falls short of the assurances given at the meeting last month that Oundle would share information which would enable a proper evaluation of sites in Glapthorne but pertinent to Oundle. Whilst we understand the difficult decisions which the Town Council has to deal with, the statement falls short of the expectation that adjacent neighbourhood planning groups should work together in a coordinated and cooperative manner in developing compatible plans, as well as inviting comment at the formal consultation stage. And then it goes on to say that their group needs to understand the spatial and sustainability policies of Oundle to be confident it is applying proper planning policies when we appraise the sites in question. Similarly, we need to be informed of the deliverability assessment of sites you intend to include to set alongside our evaluations of the boundary sites located in Glapthorne.
Did you write this, David?
No, this
What,
is
me?
Claire's
No.
fault.
This is-
I was thinking the same thing.
No, I have to say,
Maybe Malcolm must have got together.
no, I think actually the secretary, who's Alan Barnish, has written this, and he's extremely good. Anyway, it goes on to say...
I'm just pulling your leg. I'm just pulling your leg.
It goes on to say that they would reiterate their willingness to comply with our policies, but obviously need sight of the policies.
Sorry.
It goes on to say it'd be unfair to landowners and developers to reject sites based on policies which have not been shared with us. And then it complains about what I just put in that document I've just read to you not being sufficient and not giving a sound basis for Blackthorn to make judgments on the merits of the proposals forthcoming from our call for sites, which we are duly bound to evaluate in a proper and professional manner. It also ignores the fact that some of the proposals for mixed-use development and don't relate solely to housing numbers. And then it says it doesn't make any specific mention of the land proposed by Living Land for development, which lies mainly in Oundle but contains a significant area at Glapthorne. Clarification is needed on whether Oundle intends to include this site. If it is to be included, as suggested informally to us from various sources, then there are no grounds for Glapthorne to reject the part of the site in our parish. Well, actually, I think there are, but that's a different matter. Then it says it will go public in May/June with its draft plan, and the content must be robust enough to defend against challenge by developers. And concludes by saying we would in particular highlight that there are no substantial grounds for rejecting the Cotterstock Road sites unless we're able to argue their non-compliance to the Oundle plan. As indicated above, our approach has always been to seek compatibility of our plans, but we need Oundle to be willing to take us into your confidence. And then it goes on to talk about the meeting tomorrow. And the difficulty I'm going to have with the meeting tomorrow is the same difficulty that we've already had, because at this stage, Oundle Town Council has not approved the document. And the question is, to what extent, if at all, can we share a document with Blackthorne that we haven't even shared with our own council? And I think the answer to that has to be self-evident. We can't.
I think your reply, if I might just say so, actually gives them
Well, it gave them a steer. What they
a
didn't,
lot of the information.
what it didn't do, of course, is
If they
give them
chose
the
to
policy backup to it. But the difficulty is they're desperately pushing ahead with theirs, and because theirs is so much simpler to do, they are rapidly overtaking us. And I understand their desire to coordinate, but they were going to have a public meeting last month. For various reasons, they pushed it back to the end of this month. And for further reasons, they've actually added an extra meeting in June to accommodate certain difficulties they've had there. But they are putting forward it's not at this level yet, but they're putting forward some basic policies, some 10 policies for public discussion and consultation. And part of it is their analysis of various sites, and of course what they wanted to do was to be able to draft theirs on a not dissimilar basis to ours. Now, our methods of site assessment are, I have to say, entirely different in any event. But it is a problem, and I simply do not know what we are going to be able to say to them tomorrow.
Same as we've said before, we haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Can we try and break the impasse? We're trying to help each other. I know that we haven't approved the plan, but surely we can sort of mention to them areas, because we've all seen the neighbourhood plan as a council. And
Have we?
well, we've had it, yes. We had that meeting, didn't we? Where it was announced. So
Well,
every
yes.
councillor,
Not every.
we've all been sent it though.
Actually, yes, I think that's true. Actually, everybody was.
So we're in a
sent it
better
prior to that
position so
meeting.
that the councillors have seen it, and obviously under the statement saying this is not finalised or anything like that, but we could just talk about the areas that affect Glapthorne and Oundle and nothing else, because that's not giving any secrets. I just think we need to be helpful to each other. We can say the sort of thinking that we're thinking, the sort of thinking, not the decision, but what they want to know is what areas you're talking about.
Right,
I think
David's done that.
difficulty to try and provide a précis of this will be quite difficult.
Yeah.
To do it by tomorrow would
No,
be
it'd be
impossible.
impossible.
And if something got
the only
changed,
way-
we'd be held to
The only
account.
way I could provide them with what they're looking for, in essence, would be to say to them, this is, as yet, a document that has yet to be approved by council and is still being worked upon, but in an effort to try and assist you,
This is when
we're releasing it to you, but you're not allowed
No, I think we could.
to
Do you
take it outside their group.
It's risky,
I think it's risky.
very risky.
David can't be saying to
Besides,
us,
I mean,
when
it's
it
not
comes to
science
further
themselves.
council, people might change their minds and say we're going to put all the housing in one site.
Well, there has been progress as far as it's come through to committee. It has
And
been discussed.
indeed, it's fair to say that, subject to certain clarifications and minor amendments, this committee is recommending to full council to accept it. So, I mean, we can, I suppose, potentially go that far, Councillor Oakes.
This is just a matter of trust. Simple as that.
But
They've got to trust us and we've got to trust them. All they're looking for really is some reassurance that we're working and we're not working against them. That we're working with them in...
Well, that's what I was trying to do,
Very,
but
very carefully.
it was very...
No, but I'm saying this is just a matter of trust. Now, to what extent you actually go to how much you explain about what we've got in our document is a matter of judgment. And I've not been involved in it as closely as David has. But this is just a matter of trust. What we need to do is to make sure that they understand that we have their interests at heart. And that we're not acting on our own. We're not trying to... We ran into a really bad time at one point where we got, you know, every single parish around us got annoyed with us. They really did. Now, you know, we're doing a bit of a, you know, rebuilding bridges here, because, you know, Blackthorn, Ashton, Pilton, you know, and whatever else went mental when we decided they thought we were taking the world over. Now, this is a matter of trust. All they need to know is that in that document, we're not trying to creep into Blackthorn.
Yes.
Is really what it boils down to. In my sort of simplistic way. And we need to do that. We need to say, look, don't worry, we're not trying to take you over. That's it for me. I'm a simple bloke.
I concur.
I'm really sorry, but I have to go because I've got to...
And I have to go with her as well.
And you're an ideal
Have you got much?
anyway, Chairman, aren't you?
Well, we have to leave it to your good judgment, David.
I'll have a word with
Is there
the
anything
mayor.
else that we need to do quickly? Ever so quickly, because
Right,
we've got to
in
go.
terms of doing things ever so quickly, review of planning guidance document postponed again.
Thank you, Jonathan.
On the basis
Thank God.
that we're still
Yippee.
coordinating
Yippee-yi-yi.
that document and we haven't got that far. Any other relevant matters for report? I was going to report the business about Blackthorn, but I've done it already. I don't have anything else. I looked at Hanneke. Hanneke has nothing else. Very quickly around the
No,
table.
nothing.
No.
No, thank you.
No.
Right, in that case, I will declare the meeting closed
So-
at 10.
Thank you very much, David.
So I did finish it before 10 o'clock, but not by much.
No, well, you might